Today we have Ms. Ol'ga Gyárfášová, Program Director, IVO Slovakia, and a Fellow of the Institute of Public Affairs, and lecturer at Columbia University in Brussels. And thank you so much for your presentation on nationalism and why we need it and populism, and you ended with great comment in conclusion. So my first question about this interview is that can you please summarize briefly that what you actually focus or emphasize during the whole presentation?
Okay, so I emphasized, or I started with more general remarks about why nationalism became so popular in this region after the fall of communism. And there are three key factors, or three groups of factors which contributed to that. And these are economic, because many people became the losers of economic transformation, and also this dichotomy, winners, losers, was very easily politically misused. Then we have political reasons that the politics became so cold concept. So because during the change, some people had the feeling that they could participate at the changes, that the politics is closer to them, and so on and so on. And then in a very short time, the politics became very technocratic, and the citizens were simply excluded from the decision-making process. And finally, the third group is about cultural reasons, and this has something to do with the value change, with somebody called it that after the 1989, or the changes which were related to the fall of communism, that it was the period of ontological uncertainty. So that means that people simply lose the ground and the lifestyles and the ways of life they lived before during the communist era, socialist era, so was simply lost, and especially for mid-generation elderly people. So this was a period when they simply were looking for new identities.
So nationalism was one of the factors.
And nationalism was here very briefly to offer all these what people were missing in this period.
Okay. So my second question, regarding that nationalism. For example, nationalism doesn't come, just like alone. It comes with many other things. So, nationalism and its relationship with immigrants, like different immigrants group, or you can say different minority groups. For example, when you raise a slogan of nationalism, sometimes, for example, you raise a nationalism symbol like Slovak nation. So it's sometimes really hard for other minorities to accept it and to follow that nationalism. But at the same time, for Slovak, it's a big thing that, okay, we as a national, or we as a nationalism. So what would you think, like, these other groups, how they reacted, or how they are reacting?
Okay, so above all, so the nationalism in or maybe in general, so the nationalism is saying that the political and national unit are the same. So it's simply saying that, or is going back to the old concept which came by the end of 19th century, that there are nation states, and the majority ethnic group is something what is now more important for the state, or should have more rights to take decisions, and so on and so on. So of course at the legal level, so Slovakia has all the provisions to protect minority rights. So this is something what we have to underline and to say, so to say, before the brackets. But of course there are political instrumentalizations which are using minorities as the others, as the target of for blaming, for saying that they are demanding too much, or they are not loyal enough to the nation state, and so on and so on. So in Slovakia it was mostly ethnic nationalism or state-building nationalism, which was against the ethnic minorities, above all the Hungarians, because this is the biggest ethnic minority in Slovakia. This is a minority which is strong in terms of having political representation, also in having state, Hungary, in the background. So that means the Slovak nationalists and the Hungarian minority, so this was the most frequent clash and the most frequent political instrumentalization during all time of, especially after the split of Czechoslovakia, so because before, so the main question was how to live together with the Czechs, but then when Slovaks were alone, so they were looking on the other side. Now what's becoming a very sensitive problem and a raising issue is Roma minority, because here we see that it's a very complex problem, so you do not have just ethnic dimension or race dimension, but it's a very, also a very huge social problem. Slovakia does not have migrants in such broad scope as the other countries have, but this may come as well, so that means it's a pattern which is coming again and again, and so now, in spite the fact that the representative of Slovak nationalism, or the most visible representative of Slovak nationalism, the Slovak National Party, is not in parliament anymore. So there are other groups, other actors which are raising these issues.
So from this, I can, for example, from your presentation, I can relate some things. You described some types of the nationalism, and you also mentioned one speech recently made by the Prime Minister. And from that speech, I could really, I mean, everybody could, analyze that, it was very moderate, or you can say liberal speech, and in which, the Prime Minister tried to include everyone. So it's not only Slovaks, it's everybody who's living around the country. I mean, what do you think is like a result after that? I mean, when he saw that, okay, the parties who are so much nationalists, they just appear, but they just diminish. So, I mean, what did change? I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, so maybe we should put it somehow into the context that the Smer party, which is the strongest party now, the ruling party in Slovakia, is called Smer, what's in translation direction, social democracy. So it is a social democratic party by its profile, by its self-declared position. But during the first period being in government, 2006-2010, so there were very clear signs of nationalism, which this party used in its rhetoric. But now the party was really very moderate and not using this rhetoric at all, is very much concentrated on social issues, economic issues, public policy issues, and so on and so on. Is now only party, one ruling party. But this speech, which was 6 weeks ago or 2 months ago, so was at the occasion of 150th anniversary of Matica Slovenska, what is a kind of nationalistic organization per definition, and at the soil of this organization, Fico was the old Fico who against was saying that the minorities are asking for too much, that we build up this state for Slovaks and not for them. So that means it was a kind of déjà vu, so to say, to the old times or earlier times of this party. What I have to say is that after this speech, which really was using a lot of accusations against the minorities, there was a huge critique which was coming from Slovakia, from NGOs, but also from the European Parliament. And I hope that this was a kind of red line for the Prime Minister and for his party, that the nationalism is not acceptable political instrument anymore. So
yes, and my second last maybe good question, is you also answer to one of the during the question answer, the problem of dual nationality, Hungarian trying to become a Slovak, to have Slovak trying to become a Hungarian. So what are your your perspective, or you can say your opinion about this issue?
Yes, so my perspective is European. I would say that all European countries should have European citizenship, and this would be solved. But okay, so the reality is not so far yet. And so this legislation I see as something really very politicized issue, because the first step was made by Orban's government. He introduced this legislation, the offer for the Hungarians living out of Hungary, shortly after he won the election in 2010. It came into the pre-election campaign in Slovakia, so the Slovak political representation had the feeling, okay, so we have to do something, we have to somehow react to defend, and they introduced this ban for having dual citizenship. One, you are actively acquiring or asking for the citizenship of other country. I see two problems. So one is that it's now the legislation which is not just for Hungarians, so it's a general rule which is forbidding Slovaks to have a dual citizenship. Capacity of the government which we had between 2010 and 2012, which was center-right liberal government, which declared that yes, we would like to abolish this or to change this. But they were not unified or efficient enough to do it. So that means that we have to live with this legislation until today. So I'm not evaluating this law from the Hungarian perspective. So it's maybe another story. But most of the cases, so there are few cases, several dozens of cases which are under this rule now, or they lost the Slovak citizenship, but just a very, very few, few people are losing it because of acquiring Hungarian citizenship. So that means it's affecting other cases than it was originally aimed at. So, and I see it as something really very not up to date of today perspective of having European citizenship would be much easier.
Just last question and last comments, that by organizing such this kind of conferences and raising the issues national question in Central Europe, so what do you think this can contribute? What do you, your suggestions or comments?
So I think that this is the role and maybe also the duty of the elites, of academic elites, cultural elites, to build these bridges between the nations. And I'm very glad that here at this conference it's not just Visegrad 4 countries, but it's stretching to the Romania, to the former Yugoslavia, and I think that there is a tendency to certain inward-looking mentality, and we are maybe so much preoccupied by our own problems, maybe Slovak-Hungarian, Hungarian-Slovak relations. So it's always a hot topic, but we should look also to other countries and to share the experience and then also to make concrete occasions. So I've shown in my last slide in my presentation the statue of Shandarbara in Košice. Okay, so there are sometimes quarrels. So was he, because we see him as a born in Košice, but he was a Hungarian. So there are still some open questions, but we should work on it. And so I think, and I'm very glad that I was a part of this conference.
Thank you so much for your comments, and we really look forward to you, to listen to you next time.
Thank you.